Clashes raged outside the Kurdish parliament in Erbil on Monday. Demonstrators gathered after Kurdish President Masoud Barzani resigned on Sunday. Now, the move coming just a month after that controversial independence referendum. Baghdad responded to the referendum by pushing Kurdish Peshmerga fighters out of the city of Kirkuk and other disputed areas. Let's now go to Matthew Brodsky. He's a senior fellow at the Security Studies Group, and he joins us via Skype from Washington, D.C. Good to have you with us. And Barzani, in his resignation, he blamed what he called treason by his fellow Kurds. How has the divisiveness amongst the leading Kurdish clans undermined their independence agenda here?
It's very much undermined it, but I mean, we have to start with the fact that if the United States were standing behind them and there was an actual Kurdish push in the right direction, yeah, it's like it would have turned out differently. It's like they say that failure is something that'll cause a lot of pointing of the fingers, and that's essentially what's happened here. So when the Kurdish people have seen now that there's not going to be a positive future and that they way overplayed their hand, unfortunately, it could have been turned out a lot differently with Washington's support, but Washington wasn't willing to give it. And so now there's a lot of finger pointing. He's the figurehead, obviously at the top, and he's the one who was pushing for this. He's been pushing for this for decades, and he's essentially reaping what he sows. And it's very detrimental to Kurdish aspirations, around the region, we should say.
Well, in his speech, Barzani also mentioned the fickleness of the United States, and no doubt that the Kurds feel betrayed by the U.S. But the U.S. was in a tough spot here because it had two allies in this fight, Iraq, of course, and the Kurds. And the Kurds have been instrumental in the U.S.-led coalition against ISIS. How much of a strategic blunder was this for the U.S. to not back the Kurds? And what impact is that going to have on future fights against ISIS?
Well, see, that would depend, of course, who you would ask, in the establishment or not in the establishment. But since you're asking me, I'll say it was a very big...
I'm asking you, Matthew.
Right. I think it was a large strategic blunder. I mean, the United States is still wedded to the idea of a very much unified Iraq. We're wedded to the idea of Iraqi nationalism, to the extent, apparently, where we're fine with having the Sunnis and Shia in Iraq, band together, to go against the Kurds. That's not great. In the meantime, that's creating, it's basically giving added legitimacy to Iranian forces, the hostile Shabi, the paramilitary forces, to remain there. The Kurdish forces have basically now been beaten back. It's essentially guaranteeing a divided sectarian state, and at the same time, we're still the ones clinging to this idea of a unified Iraq, which then, of course, means a unified Syria. And we just want to deal with Baghdad. So we're still pretending that Abadi, as prime minister, is working with us more so than Iran. And it's causing all kinds of problems because it turns out, the square peg doesn't fit through the round hole.
Matthew, why did the Peshmerga not put up more of a fight when you had those Iraqi forces coming in, taking over parts of Kirkuk? They said that they didn't want to have any more bloodshed. Was that the real reason, or is that where the divisiveness amongst the Kurdish clans came in, with some cutting deals with the Iraqis?
It's certainly both. I mean, if they thought that there would be, first of all, that they could call the bluff and win, okay, they were wrong. Another aspect is that they once they're staring defeat in the face, some did cut deals, but it literally, when you see the extent to which Iran was really behind this, the way Soleimani was behind the paramilitary forces, there was not really a way that they could win. They weren't fighting ragtag elements from a specific, town where ISIS was located. This wasn't an ISIS-type battle. This was well trained with American equipment, unfortunately, going after them. So the writing was on the wall. To have stayed and put up a giant fight would have made great headlines, but I'm not sure it would have turned out differently, especially if you look at what's taking place next door in Syria. The world is apparently used to really disturbing images and headlines and saying, well, that's too bad, unfortunately.
Matthew, is the hope of an independent Kurdistan now dead for the Kurds?
I don't think it's dead, but I think the United States needs to change its direction and policy in a way that would work with them. I mean, they could be natural allies, certainly compared to Iran. It's going to have ripple effects throughout the region, in Syria as well. It's basically demonstrated that America's allies are friends for a period of time, and then we have no problem turning our back. But it's certainly the prospects of independence are far more distant today than they were, say, a month ago.
Well, yeah, definitely made big regressions in that prospect. Matthew Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Security Studies Group, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
Up next on ClearCut, more reforms in Saudi Arabia, the new rights that women will enjoy in the kingdom next year.